December 1942, when Toyota's top industrial spies infiltrated Ford's River Rouge plant. They expected to find American weakness instead. They watched in horror as a complete 3.5 million part Sherman tank rolled off the assembly line every 67 minutes, faster than Japan could produce a single motorcycle. These men returned to Tokyo with intelligence so shocking that their own military refused to believe it, dismissing their reports as enemy propaganda. But what did these spies really discover about America's true industrial power that made them realize Japan had already lost the war? December 1942. Snow fell on the docks of Tokyo as 3 men in dark coats boarded a cargo ship bound for America. These were not ordinary travelers. Hiroshi Yamamoto, chief engineer at Toyota Motor Company, carried blueprints hidden in his coat lining. Beside him stood Kenji Tanaka, a former Imperial Navy officer turned industrial spy. The third man, Saburo Ito, had spent years studying American factories from stolen photographs and captured documents. Japan was losing the war, though few dared speak it aloud. Emperor Hirohito's forces stretched thin across the Pacific, while American bombers rained fire on Japanese cities. In the homeland, factories ran on empty stomachs and broken machines. Workers melted down kitchen pots to make bullets. Rice rations grew smaller each month. Children collected scrap metal from bombed buildings, their small hands bleeding from twisted steel. The 3 spies had one mission: find out how America built so many tanks, ships, and planes. Japanese intelligence reported impossible numbers. American factories supposedly produced more war materials in 1 month than Japan made in an entire year. The High Command called these reports lies. American workers were soft and lazy, they said. American factories were weak and slow. Yamamoto touched the stolen documents in his pocket. His own Toyota factory back home struggled to build 50 trucks per month. Half-starved workers labored with broken tools and no spare parts. The assembly line stopped daily when power failed. Yet, American spies claimed Ford Motor Company produced thousands of vehicles every week. How could this be true? The cargo ship creaked through icy Pacific waters. For 3 weeks, the men practiced their cover stories. They were Japanese businessmen seeking to buy American steel. They spoke English with thick accents, but well enough to avoid suspicion. Tanaka had studied American customs from captured Hollywood films. He knew Americans loved baseball, hamburgers, and jazz music. These details might save their lives. As their ship approached San Francisco Bay, the 3 men saw something that made their breath catch. The harbor stretched beyond the horizon, filled with more ships than existed in all of Japan. Massive cargo vessels, loaded with steel, oil, and grain, warships bigger than anything in the Imperial Navy. Construction cranes towered like metal giants, building new vessels faster than Japan could sink them. Yamamoto gripped the ship's rail with white knuckles. If America's ports looked like this, what would their factories reveal? The mission that had seemed straightforward in Tokyo now felt like walking into a dragon's den. But orders were orders, and failure meant disgrace worse than death. The 3 spies had no idea they were about to witness the most shocking display of industrial might in human history. What they would see at Ford's River Rouge plant would shatter everything they believed about America, about war, and about their own nation's chances of victory. The train to Detroit rumbled past endless farms heavy with corn and wheat. Yamamoto pressed his face to the window, counting grain silos that stretched to the horizon. Back home, Japanese farmers fought over every handful of rice. Here, surplus food rotted in fields because America grew too much to harvest. Tanaka stared at cattle herds numbering in the thousands. Japan had eaten its horses years ago. At Detroit's train station, the 3 men watched workers grab lunch from metal carts, thick sandwiches packed with real beef, cold bottles of Coca-Cola that cost more than a Japanese worker earned in a day. Ito's stomach cramped from hunger as he watched Americans throw away half-eaten meals. The waste alone could feed his village for weeks. Ford's River Rouge plant appeared through the morning mist like a steel city. Smokestacks reached toward clouds, belching white steam from furnaces that never stopped burning. The factory stretched for miles along the Detroit River, bigger than most Japanese towns. Guard towers dotted the perimeter, but the guards looked bored and lazy. They waved the fake businessmen through without checking papers twice. Inside the main building, the noise hit like thunder. Hundreds of machines hammered steel plates into tank hulls. Sparks flew from welding torches as bright as lightning. The assembly line moved with mechanical precision, carrying half-built Sherman tanks from station to station. Workers in clean uniforms operated machines that cut metal like butter. These weren't the starving laborers Japan expected to find. Yamamoto pulled out a pocket watch and began counting. Every 67 minutes, a complete tank rolled off the end of the assembly line. Fresh, green paint, working treads, loaded ammunition. The math made his head spin. 850 tanks per month from this single factory. Japan's entire tank force numbered fewer than 2,000 machines, most of them broken down from lack of spare parts. A supervisor noticed the visiting businessmen and offered them coffee in real china cups. The brew tasted rich and strong, nothing like the bitter acorn water served in Japanese factories. He bragged that River Rouge employed 120,000 workers across 3 shifts. They produced their own steel, glass, and rubber on site. Raw materials arrived by train and ship in quantities that boggled the mind. The 3 spies watched teenage boys, barely old enough to shave, operating machines worth more than entire Japanese factories. These kids ate hot dogs for lunch and drank ice-cold milk like it was water. Their shoes had no holes. Their clothes showed no patches. They laughed and joked while building weapons of war, as if tank production was just another day at the office. As afternoon shadows lengthened, Tanaka realized the terrible truth. This wasn't even America's biggest factory. Ford had dozens of plants just like this one. General Motors made even more tanks and trucks. The numbers climbing in his notebook painted a picture too frightening to believe. America wasn't just winning the war through superior tactics or luck. They were drowning Japan in an endless flood of steel and fire. The moment of complete collapse came on their 3rd day at River Rouge. During the lunch break whistle, Yamamoto stood frozen as thousands of American workers poured from the factory doors like water from a broken dam. They carried metal lunchboxes filled with thick sandwiches, fresh fruit, and thermos bottles of hot coffee. The sight hit him harder than any bomb blast he had survived in Tokyo. These workers looked nothing like the propaganda posters back home showed. American laborers were supposed to be weak and soft from easy living. Instead, these men had strong shoulders and clear eyes. They wore leather boots without holes and winter coats that looked new. Their faces showed no signs of hunger or fear. They complained loudly about overtime pay and working conditions, words that would earn a Japanese worker a beating from the military police. Tanaka watched a group of workers share cigarettes and laugh at jokes he could not understand. One man pulled photographs from his wallet, showing pictures of his family at a beach vacation. Another talked about buying a new car after the war ended. These people acted like victory was certain, like defeat was impossible to imagine. Their confidence felt as solid as the steel tanks rolling past on the assembly line. The 3 spies gathered around a picnic table where an elderly worker named Frank had invited them to sit. Frank had kind eyes and gray hair, reminding Yamamoto of his own grandfather who had died from starvation the previous winter. The old man shared his lunch without asking for payment, tearing his roast beef sandwich in half and offering pieces to the visitors. He spoke slowly so they could understand his English. Frank explained how the factory operated in simple words that cut through their hearts like sword blades. River Rouge consumed more raw materials in one day than Japan's entire steel industry produced in a month. The plant's electrical power could light up half of Tokyo. Fresh water flowed through pipes at rates that exceeded Japan's largest rivers. Everything ran on a scale too vast for minds trained in scarcity to grasp. The old workers showed them photographs of other American factories. Boeing plants in Seattle building bombers by the hundreds. Shipyards in California, launching new vessels every week. Tank factories in Ohio, Michigan, and Pennsylvania, all producing at the same impossible pace. Frank spoke casually about numbers that made Yamamoto's hands shake. 50,000 tanks this year, maybe 60,000 next year if the war continued. As Frank talked, Ito felt something breaking inside his chest like ice cracking on a frozen pond. All his life he had believed in Japanese superiority, the emperor's divine protection, the warrior spirit that conquered Asia, Bushido honor that made one Japanese soldier worth 10 Americans. These beliefs crumbled like rice paper in rain as he watched teenagers operate machines that could outproduce his entire homeland. The afternoon shift change brought fresh revelation. A new army of workers arrived to take over production without missing a single beat. The assembly line never stopped moving. Sparks never stopped flying. Hammers never stopped pounding. This factory operated 24 hours every day, 7 days every week. It had run without pause since America entered the war, and it would keep running until victory arrived. Yamamoto pulled out his notebook with trembling fingers and wrote down the calculations that had haunted his dreams. If Ford alone could build one tank every 67 minutes, and America had dozens of similar factories, then Japan faced an enemy that could replace every destroyed tank within days. The Imperial Navy's greatest victory might sink 10 American ships, but American shipyards could build 20 new ones before the celebration ended. Standing in the shadow of River Rouge, watching endless streams of Sherman tanks roll toward waiting trains, the three men finally understood the truth their leaders refused to see. Japan had not simply picked a fight with a stronger opponent. They had declared war against the industrial might of an entire continent. The outcome was not in doubt. It never had been. The only question was how long the slaughter would continue before their homeland accepted the inevitable surrender that these machines made certain. The return voyage to Japan in March 1943 felt like sailing toward their own graves. Yamamoto clutched his leather briefcase containing photographs, blueprints, and production numbers that would doom his homeland. The three men barely spoke during the long Pacific crossing. They knew their report would either be dismissed as enemy propaganda or land them in military prison for spreading defeatist lies. Truth had become treason in wartime Japan. Tokyo Bay looked smaller after seeing San Francisco Harbor. The city's bombed buildings and empty streets felt like a different planet compared to Detroit's bustling factories. Hungry children begged at the docks, where American children would have been playing baseball. The contrast burned in their memories like acid poured on open wounds. At Imperial Navy headquarters, Admiral Yamamoto listened to their report with growing anger. His fist slammed the wooden desk when Hiroshi described Ford's production numbers. The admiral called them fools and cowards for believing American lies. He accused them of being brainwashed by enemy propaganda during their mission. Their photographs were declared fakes. Their measurements were called impossible. The briefcase full of evidence was locked away in a vault where it would never see daylight again. Kenji Tanaka returned to his small apartment, above a noodle shop where his wife and children waited in the dark. Electric power had been cut to save fuel for the war effort. His family gathered around a single candle while he tried to explain what he had witnessed in America without speaking the words that would bring the secret police to their door. His youngest daughter asked when the war would end. He could not meet her eyes when he whispered that it would be soon. The bombing of Japan began exactly as the three men had predicted. American B-29 bombers filled the skies like clouds of steel locusts. The fire raids on Tokyo burned for days, turning entire neighborhoods into ash and memory. Each explosion reminded them of the endless production lines they had witnessed at River Rouge. Every bomb that fell had rolled off an American assembly line with the same mechanical precision they had seen building Sherman tanks. Hiroshi Yamamoto worked in what remained of Toyota's bombed factory, trying to build trucks with salvaged parts and starving workers. Production had dropped to 5 vehicles per month when parts could be found at all. Meanwhile, his notebooks told him that American factories were producing thousands of tanks, trucks, and planes every week. The mathematics of defeat played out exactly as he had calculated during those terrible days in Detroit. When Emperor Hirohito announced surrender in August 1945, The three men felt no surprise. They had known this moment would come since that first lunch break at River Rouge when they watched American workers eat beef sandwiches and complain about overtime pay. The war had ended the day they realized Japan was fighting not just another army, but the industrial might of an entire continent that could outproduce them 100-1. In the years after surrender, as American occupation forces rebuilt Japan with the same efficient methods they had used to destroy it, Hiroshi Yamamoto often thought about Frank, the kind old worker who had shared his lunch with 3 enemy spies. That simple act of humanity had taught him more about American strength than all the tanks and bombers combined. A nation confident enough to show kindness to strangers, wealthy enough to waste food, and powerful enough to treat war production like just another job was impossible to defeat through military force alone. The real lesson from their mission was not about assembly lines or production numbers, though those had sealed Japan's fate. It was about what kind of society could build such machines while still maintaining the human dignity to share a sandwich with hungry visitors. They had witnessed not just industrial superiority, but a completely different way of organizing civilization itself. Japan had learned to fight. America had learned to build. In the end, the builders always win, because they create the tools that make victory inevitable.